Welcome to Eurofins Viracor Clinical Diagnostics Podcast, where I'll be sharing up-to-date scientific advances, key diagnostic testing, and our most recent innovations. Enjoy part 2 of our 10-part series, originally broadcast live from ATC24 in Philadelphia.
Good afternoon, it's Kevin Foth again from Eurofins Transplant, sitting at ATC, American Transplant Congress 2024, and we are excited to be joined by Dr. John Friedman, Chief Medical Officer of Transplant Genomics. John has an extensive career in the medical field prior to joining TGI, and he's very passionate about supporting kidney donors and other folks affected and going through the transplant process. So, just a couple of questions to start off with. Let's talk a little bit about ATC 2024, maybe some experiences or takeaways you've had from the conference as we're at the coming up on the end of day 4 of the event.
Kevin, thanks so much. Really appreciate being able to speak to this vast audience that we're going to reach. ATC is a remarkable convention. Everybody who's anybody vaguely even associated with transplantation is here. Some of the highlights for me, I got invited by AST to speak at the AST Medical Directors Forum on transplant contracting. Even though I'm now doing molecular diagnostics, I was in the payer world for 21 years, and probably no one in the American Society of Transplantation knows more about contracting than I do, and quite frankly, I just had so much fun doing it. I like to say you can take the boy out of the pear, but you can't take the pear out of the boy. And it was very rewarding to have several kidney program medical directors come up to me after that and say, wow, that was great. I didn't know how much I didn't know. And, I think I have one of the great jobs in the world of transplant, because I pretty much have the ability to do anything I want that promotes organ transplantation. That is the goal of transplant genomics, to get more people successfully transplanted, and through our technology have those transplants last longer to fulfill the goal of one transplant per life. So if I can participate in something that increases kidney or liver or even heart or lung, that is not only the right thing to do for society, it's the right thing to do for TGI.
Yeah, well, not only with your actions here at ATC and your involvement in advocacy for transplantation, I understand you've been spending a lot of time in Washington talking to Congress and other organizations about the needs for I don't want to say better regulation, but better awareness and funding for those being in the transplant arena.
I'm sure almost everybody who's going to be listening to this is aware of what MolDX, the MAC for Medicare over Molecular Diagnostics, did about 15 months ago with a new set of billing articles that was very restrictive and impactful for transplant genomics. They did 3 things that were pretty bad, in our opinion. One, they restricted the use of dual biomarkers, which meant that our world-class and groundbreaking test of gene expression profiling and donor-derived cell-free DNA, known as Omnigraph, pretty much had to be taken off the market. And that led to pretty severe financial impacts and led to a rather large reduction here at the company. Not only that, they tried to restrict the use of molecular diagnostics to protocol biopsy transplant centers. And we know that only 19% of transplant centers in the U.S. actually do protocol biopsies, and they're usually in big cities. So that was going to be a severe access restriction to underserved and rural populations, directly impacting their ability to get this innovative testing. And third, they took down a context of use table, which was the single source of truth of what molecular test was covered in what scenario. And without that, it would be impossible to educate transplant providers as to which tests would be able to be used in any given scenario. Now, we started lobbying through a firm in October, and our ask has been 3 things. One, to restore the ability to use the dual test. There's plenty of scientific support for the 2 tests better together through the Park paper in C. Jason in October of 2021 as good validation. But we kind of thought it was pretty arbitrary in that shortly after the issuance of the billing articles, MolDX approved HeartCare, which is a dual biomarker test for cardiac transplantation. Secondly, we wanted the restoration of the context of use table so we could educate the providers again. And third, and probably, in my opinion, one of the most important things, was restoration of access to molecular diagnostics to all transplant providers, not just those in protocol biopsy centers. So those patients in the rural populations that could not travel to a protocol biopsy center would have access to this technology. So Brian Tees, our president, and myself have been to Washington probably combined almost 10 times since November. We have done a lot of pounding of the pavement per se. We have visited every representative and senator's offices where not just Transplant Genomics, but Eurofins has a footprint, therefore a constituency to pique the interest of these lawmakers and, quite frankly, some other lawmakers as well. And it's actually was incredibly fun. We hosted Representative Sharice Davids, who is the U.S. representative for Eastern Kansas, in our office in Lenexa just a week ago today. And she's a dynamic, young, vital representative. Fascinating story. She's the daughter of a single Army mom. She's one of 2 Native American women in the House of Representatives. She's very pro access and equity in healthcare and has really been a staunch supporter of our ask. So, also realizing that our competitors had asked for a full repeal of the billing articles, which we think would have been a big disaster in that it would have thrown the entire field back into the Old West, every provider for themselves, and in our opinion would have led to, again, gross overutilization because there would be no context of use restrictions, and it would have just been a disaster. So through our asks and the support of the representatives and senators, I think we've been quite successful. First and foremost, they've removed the restriction in the billing articles of access to only protocol biopsy centers, meaning that community nephrologists who take care of 60% of all the transplant patients after the first year now have access to this technology. They have partially restored the table of context of use, not quite as far as we think they need to go, but we're making some progress. MolDX claims it's a Medicare issue, and Medicare claims it's a MolDX issue. A little too much politics for us. But they haven't really fully addressed the restriction of the dual biomarker. So we are continuing to lobby to get that removed because we still feel it's kind of arbitrary given that there is good scientific validation of the 2 tests together. But the other thing we're doing, which I think will have a major impact, and I'm very excited for this, is that Transplant Genomics is going to combine gene expression and donor-derived cell-free DNA into a single test with a single result and a single billing code, which will be equal to basically the price of gene expression alone. And further down the road, we are also going to add viral DNA testing, specifically tortenovirus, which is a ubiquitous and non-pathogenic virus that, when it is elevated, is a good indicator of over-immunosuppression. And we're going to throw that in, essentially, again, 3 tests for the price of 1. So not only now going forward will providers have the ability to have 3 times the information, but it's going to cost the same as a single donor-derived cell-free DNA test. And we think this is really going to revolutionize the molecular biomarkers moving forward. And when MolDX, hopefully soon, approves that concept, we're going back on the market with the dual biomarkers, which, quite frankly, you asked me what I've taken away from this conference, everybody wants it. I'm not here to bash cell-free DNA. It has its value in the right patient, in the right scenario, in a for-cause scenario, or patients that like those who got transplanted after being highly sensitized, that are more likely to have antibody-mediated rejection. Cell-free DNA is a fabulous test. And although I think our cell-free DNA test, TRAC, is better than the other two cell-free DNA products on the market, I don't have the data to statistically prove that. But if you can get it all together, cell-free DNA, gene expression, and viral DNA in one test for the cost of the other person's cell-free DNA test, I think, Kevin, quite frankly, that is an enormous game changer that's going to take off like wildfire.
Significant game changer, and really it's kind of hand in glove. You've got the technology of TrueGraph, you've got the technology of TRAC. They look at different aspects of the transplantation organ and how the recipient is responding to that. Can you go in a little bit more detail about the two technologies of those assays?
So, great point. As we know from Suk Park's paper, there are two different kinds of rejection. There's T-cell mediated cellular rejection, and there's antibody-mediated rejection. And the tests actually uniquely detect the different types of biopsy of rejection, and there's an overlap. So I don't think he'll care that I mentioned this, but Dr. Stan Jordan at Cedars-Sinai, I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and they use a lot of donor-derived cell-free DNA because they transplant more highly sensitized patients than anybody else. And he said, yeah, John, I agree that cell-free DNA is a lousy test to detect T-cell mediated rejection. So it's important to detect T-cell mediated rejection because that's the first thing that's going to happen in the rejection cascade. And there are papers that have shown that if you detect and treat T-cell mediated rejection early, graft survival is equal to those who have had no evidence of biopsy-proven rejection at all. If you have T-cell mediated rejection and don't treat it, you will have lower overall graft survival. So the great thing about the TrueGraph gene expression is it's going to pick up T-cell mediated rejection early enough to intervene. But there's also an overlapping population of antibody-mediated rejection that's usually associated with tubulolysis, which is the antibodies attacking the tubules in the kidneys, which is where you're releasing the donor DNA from. It gets in the blood, and the donor-derived cell-free DNA picks up the donor's DNA in the recipient's blood. Why these tests work so well together is because now there are overlapping patients that have both T-cell mediated rejection and antibody mediated rejection, and it really covers the gamut of all the rejections. Any individual test has a positive predictive value of about 50%. It's a coin toss. These tests are great because they have individually high negative predictive values, and the tests come back negative. You can go to your patient, everything's fine, come back and see me at the appropriate time interval, whether you're screening or following up a for-cause scenario. When you put the two tests together, because of the overlap of the Venn diagram, the positive predictive value of TrueGraph in the Park paper was about 84%, which is almost twice the positive predictive value of any component by itself. And the negative predictive value went pretty close to 90%. And when you have a double negative, that is very reassuring to your patient that they do not have T-cell mediated rejection or antibody mediated rejection going on. And that's a sign of good health, good kidney health, and come back and see me in 3 months.
Yeah, very good. And I'm a strategic marketing person. We call that the power of and. TrueGraph and TRAC and TRAC ID, I come up with a pretty significant stellar assay to give an accurate visual as to what that patient's undergoing and how their transplanted organ is functioning in their body.
So what's even cooler than putting Omnigraph back together is adding the viral DNA component. And its main use will be in immunosuppression reduction. The first place we thought about using this was actually in livers. The leading cause of patient death after liver transplantation is calcineurin inhibitor complications. On the short term, it's infection, on the long, and CNIs are very nephrotoxic. So actually the rate of kidney transplant after liver transplant has been skyrocketing over the last 5 years. But there's also the long-term complications of cardiovascular disease, other metabolic diseases, and cancers. So if you have the ability to titrate calcineurin inhibitors down in liver or kidney patients, you are going to reduce, we suspect, and we're going to be doing this as part of our large randomized controlled trial that's coming out soon, that you can decrease the incidence of complications. There is nothing worse, in my opinion, than death with a functioning graft that is related to a complication of the immunosuppression. You have to have the immunosuppression or you're going to lose the graft. And it's this fine double-edged sword of how low can I go without getting rejection? How can I minimize the long-term complications? And at the same time, maximize the graft life by avoiding rejection. And we believe that the addition of this ID component, so it's most likely, although you're in the marketing side will tell me, it's going to be Omnigraph ID. The ability to do not only the dual Omnigraph test for rejection, but then the ability to use this also to reduce immunosuppression and reduce those complications. And again, the really cool thing, all for the price of a cell-free DNA test.
That's fantastic. So, all right, a lot of exciting things coming. So this is today. What about in 6 months?
I think by the end of this year, and certainly by the time we meet again in San Francisco for the World Transplant Congress in 2025, we will have Omnigraph ID. We will be where we need to be and should be, because it's all driven by the best science. And in my personal discussions with the providers, everybody wants Omnigraph ID. So I see a big surge in transplant genomics with Eurofins. I see basically by a year from now, we should be large enough to have a booth that covers the entire floor. And what's really cooler than that is this innovation is going to be a game changer for the providers. In the OPTN kidney report of 2022, second sentence says there's been no significant innovation to prolong kidney allograft survival over the last 3 decades. Everyone's done a great job increasing 1-year graft and patient survival, but the slope for 10, 20, and 30-year survival hasn't moved. I believe Omnigraph ID is the innovation that is going to flip the slope of that curve, make it there will be greater long-term graft survival. Patients will not need to return to dialysis. They will not need to be retransplanted. And if you don't need a retransplant, that means someone else is going to get a first transplant. And the grafts are going to last longer, and we are going to get closer to achieve our goal of 1 transplant for life.
That's a wonderful goal to have, especially with the number of people currently on the transplant list awaiting a kidney, heart, liver, lung, whatever solid organ there is out there.
And it's the current climate of transplant. There are not enough organs. 2 things that are really kind of interesting to me. One is the world of xenotransplant, which you know is genetically modified pig kidneys. There's a really potential to get an additional 40,000 kidneys on the market in any given year. But they're high-risk transplants that are actually going to need biomarker monitoring even more than obviously native human kidneys. And there's a recent initiative by HHS and CMS called IOTA, increasing organ transplant access. And that's really a front load the system, decreasing deceased donor discard, increasing living donation. But if you don't have that mechanism to take care and improve the long-term outcomes, it's just going to mean there's more people that are going to have graft failure. And actually, to me, that is more people that should have access to Omnigraph ID.
Very strong, very, very powerful words there, and I agree with you 100%. Running short on our time here, but I want to give you a few minutes of a personal message, talk about anything you want to. Then I've got one question I have to ask you from your past.
Go ahead.
So, you've been in the business for a while. What got you excited? What kind of tweaked your interest to saying, I'm going to become a physician, I'm going to get involved in transplants, I'm going to get involved in this whole cadre of...
Kevin, you're a dog. So I know where this is going, and I've said it in interviews before. When I was a little kid, back in the 60s, early 60s, there was a show that you can now probably find on YouTube called Marcus Welby, and there's another one, Medical Center. And Steve Kiley, the guy who used to ride around the motorcycle, family doctors, is really appealing future of what I want to do. And that kind of got me interested in medicine in the first place. And I kind of retrospectively think I could have done many things in my life, and I have no regrets having gone into medicine, obviously. How I got into transplant, though, is really just being in the wrong place at the right time. I was overseeing the care management program for Pacific Care of California, which was half of the enterprise for Pacific Care Health Solutions. And there was something going on in the world that the SVP of Quality for Pacific Care Health System says, John, you're going to put together a transplant network, and since you own 50% of the transplants under care management in California, you're going to put that network together and you're going to run it. And I thought it was the worst day of my life, but actually retrospectively it was the best day of my life. I felt like I was 2 inches tall, and now I cannot think of a more fulfilling career. I've been doing this since 2001, so 23 years. Transplant is an exciting, dynamic, every day brings something new, and damn if we don't take care of the sickest of the sick. Anyone on any transplant list, even kidneys, they're dying. Dialysis is a slow sucking death. The only good dialysis chair is an empty dialysis chair. We need to do everything we can to get more people transplanted and make sure those grafts last as long as the recipient is alive. And I can't think of a better place to be right now, and in my role with transplant genomics. I wake up every day just enthusiastic and fired up and ready to go.
Great. So if somebody wants to find out more about transplant genomics, shameless plug, what's the website?
Transplantgenomics.com.
Transplantgenomics.com. Very good.
And you can reach out through LinkedIn, message me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything transplant related, and I look forward to coming back next year at WTC and saying, Kevin, I told you so. Look where we are. Look where the world is. I think the next 12 months are just going to be a roller coaster, but it's going to be very exciting, and everything's going to be really, really great.
I'll be happy to hear those words. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Friedman.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Enjoy the remainder of the show here at ATC, American Transplant Congress 2024.
Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all the latest information. If you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends and colleagues to subscribe too. With over 40 years of diagnostic innovation and specialized expertise in infectious disease, pre- and post-transplant, allergy and immunology testing for immunocompromised and critical patients, Eurofins ViraCore is committed to helping medical professionals, transplant teams, and reference labs get results faster when it matters most. ViraCore is passionate about delivering value to our clients by providing timely, actionable information, never losing sight of the connection between the testing we perform and the patients you serve.